Hello everyone and Happy New Year. Good fucking riddance to 2021 and welcome to 2022. Just a quick heads up about this video, I'm like 80% certain my upstairs neighbors must have killed someone and are trying to hide the body because they have been just like cleaning and vacuuming and stomping all day long. So if there's any background noise, that's probably what's going on, and I'm very sorry in advance. But anyways, I've been complaining for the last few months that I haven't watched as much as I usually do. I feel like I usually average somewhere about 13 to 15, and I've had a few months of like 10 to 12, and it's all evened out because I watched 19 films this month, which is very exciting. This video is probably going to be very long, so strap on in and let's talk about the movies that I watched in December of 2021. Up first, I saw 2021 release Spencer, directed by Pablo Larraín. I saw this in theaters and I gave it 3.5 stars. So this movie takes place during 3 days around Christmas in the life of Princess Diana, played by Kristen Stewart. As it just kind of like slowly shows the way in which being a part of the royal family is bad for her and anxiety inducing, and ultimately why, I guess this is a spoiler for the movie, but it's also historical events, like why she ends up leaving that world. I thought this took a little bit of time to get going. I ended up loving Kristen Stewart's performance, but I didn't love her first few scenes. But once you really get into it, like you really feel the claustrophobia of that weekend, which I think is heightened by the score of this movie. Johnny Greenwood does just like an incredible job. The captions, I watched, spoiler alert, I watched this a second time this month and I watched it on a TV, and so I had captions and it always said like discordant jazz playing, and I actually feel like that very uncanny, uneasy jazz music created this atmosphere where the audience, just like Diana, was always on edge. This was shot brilliantly. I love the really close-up angles, and I also love the way in which like ghosts or apparitions were always like just around the corner. Like it really puts you in Diana's headspace. The way things look beautiful, or the way things would have looked beautiful to her, the way things feel anxious, or the way they would have felt, you know, anxiety-inducing to her. So I just feel like this was a very good portrayal of how that weekend must have felt. I've been teetering between a 3.5 and a 4 for this movie the whole time. I think it's missing just like a secret special something for me, but it's very good and it's one of my favorite movies of the year, so if you haven't seen it, I really recommend it. Next, I watched My Own Private Idaho, directed by Gus Van Sant. This was 5 stars and completely wrecked me. So this movie is very loosely based on a few Shakespeare plays, Henry IV Part 1 and 2 and Henry V, and it follows these two young male street hustlers kind of like in their life, and then they go on a road trip as you watch their friendship. The dialogue is vaguely Shakespearean, which I've seen some people not like, but I think that is such an integral part of this movie because I think kind of like the grandiosity, I don't know, of the dialogue is what allows for so much of the rest of the film to be very restrained and subtle. What I wrote in my notes is, the style hints at tragedy, allowing the story to unfold with what I can only describe as immense grace. Because this shows this story of unrequited love and youth, and like just figuring yourself out and grief, just all of this in ways that I feel like are so not in your face. They're told so well, but it's not hammy at all despite everything that it's tackling. There's this scene around a campfire, which might be my favorite scene I saw all month, and one of my favorite scenes I've seen all year. So this is just incredible. Good Will Hunting is one of my favorite movies of all time, and this joins that echelon. So Gus Van Sant can do no wrong in my eyes based on the 2 films of his I've seen. Next, I watched Cleo from 5 to 7, directed by Agnes Varda, which I gave 4 stars at the time, but like has really gone to the back of my memory, so I've bumped it down to a 3.5. So in this movie, we are following a singer in 1960s Paris through like 2 hours of her life as she awaits the results of a biopsy. And I really loved what this film was doing thematically in terms of, I think, exploring existentialism, especially, you know, that French existentialism. But at the end of the day, it's also kind of just like missing that something for me. In a way I'm just not sure I'm gonna be able to articulate. This film was forgettable. While I was watching, I was impressed by the subtle acting and the way humor is laced in this thing. She's obviously waiting to see, like, is my death imminent? Is it about to, you know, arrive? Do I have cancer? And so I think it was well done, but just ultimately isn't something that's gonna stick with me for any amount of time. Next, for some reason, I watched Never Let Me Go, directed by Mark Romanek. This is an adaptation of the Kazuo Ishiguro novel. The novel is one of my favorite novels of all time, but I gave this movie 3 stars because I think what this misses is like the ultimate soul of that book. Like, that book has so much character and soul and dimension, and this movie, in contrast, kind of felt like almost a dull, lifeless romance. Never Let Me Go is this book about 3 people who were friends when they were younger, like at this academy, and it's told from one woman's perspective years after the fact. There's a lot else going on, but I'm not gonna spoil what is going on, and I feel like the other stuff that's going on is very important to the book, and the way those themes comment on the romantic themes is essential, but I feel like the movie just waters it down to like this pastel, weird, landscapey, romantic thing. So it was fine, but it's not something I would ever recommend to someone, especially not over the book. Then in theaters, I saw West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg. I give this 4 stars, which was kind of like predestined, because there was just a lot of things about this that like made me know I was going to at least like West Side Story. So one, I was a theater kid growing up. I'm from Long Island. I just like, theater was always a big part of my life, and like, me and theater aren't exactly on like one-to-one perfect terms anymore, but when theater's done right, it still really connects with me. So I've always loved the original West Side Story, for instance, and I was excited to see, you know, a musical well done in theaters. And then the guy who plays Riff, Mike fucking Feist, when I saw Newsies back in 2012 or whatever, he was one of like the original Newsy boys, and at that time I was like, that's the one I'm gonna have a crush on, because that's what you did when you saw Newsies when you were a young girl in 2012. So it's actually been like very gratifying for me to see some success rise. He was then in Dear... I was just excited to see this man in a movie, and I think he did a great job. I think the stuff that this movie does right, it does really right. So kind of 3 of the side characters, Riff, Anita, and Bernardo, the acting choices for those are incredible. Great dancers, great singers, really convey and carry the emotions. The big problem with this movie is just that Ansel Elgort sucks. The thing with both Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story is that, like, obviously these 2 crazy kids are going off to do this crazy thing. They're like, they've just met and they're like, let's get married. So you have to believe in their chemistry, because there's no other reason you would believe that they would go do these things. And Rachel Ziegler, who plays Maria, is really trying her best, but Ansel Elgort is just, go girl, give us nothing. So I think it's tough to allow yourself to buy into this story when you don't buy into the chemistry. You don't understand why these 2 people would go off and get married, because like, what's there? But outside of that, I think the choreography was great. It is so much fun to see a musical that is actually shot interestingly, and I just had a very good time with West Side Story 2021. Next, I saw Local Hero, directed by Bill Forsyth, with which I gave 4 stars. This is about an American oil worker who gets sent to Scotland. Yep, Scotland, who gets sent to Scotland because his company wants to buy this entire town so like they can set up shop there. And while he's there, he finds himself falling in love with the quieter pace of life, and he's like, what do I really want to do with my life? And I just thought this was such a cozy, wonderful film. I think the way it explores those themes that I just laid out, it does that really expertly, and I also feel like the way this film looks conveys that well. It's set, you know, it's like this seaside town, and I think the blues of the ocean and the sky just like really gives the appropriate feeling for this film. This is just a very life-affirming film that cares about the richness of the human experience, and so many films that I watch are heartbreaking, but this one just made me feel good. So that was a very nice thing to watch in the midst of this month where like many movies just completely broke me. Alright, so then I watched Personal Shopper, directed by Olivier Assayas, and well, I went on a journey with this one because while I was watching it, I was not a big fan, and then after the movie, when I started thinking about it, I really loved what it made me think about and like the way I could then analyze the film after the fact. So I've ended on a 3.5 star, but that's arbitrary anyways. This movie is about a woman who is a medium and also a personal shopper currently living in Paris because her brother died there and she is waiting for a sign from him. And what I found myself thinking about after watching this movie is how much like every single character in this movie is basically a ghost themselves. There's something that's shrouded. So she's a personal shopper for this famous person. All the work she does gets completely unnoticed. We follow people like an affair partner who obviously is meant to be kept in the shadows. There's someone else, oh, like a security developer who, like, obviously he's doing work for this company, but he doesn't get any recognition. A deceased carpenter who, again, like, when you're a carpenter, like, you are not known, only the work is. So I feel like this movie is just, like, surrounded by ghosts. I guess all I can say is that this movie is an interesting meditation on, like, the body and grief and the commodification of the self in the digital world and in capitalism, while at the same time, I often felt like the filmmaking wasn't excellent. I didn't love a lot of the dialogue, I didn't love a lot of how some of the scenes were constructed. It felt a lot like it was like telling me things instead of showing them sometimes. So it's a weird experience. If someone told me they loved this movie, I'd understand it. If someone told me they hated this movie, I'd understand it. Because I feel like the reason I'm in the middle is because there are things I loved and things I hated, and that's personal shopper. Then I watched House of Gucci, directed by Ridley Scott. I gave this 2.5 stars, and Mr. Ridley Scott is officially 0 for 2 on the year. This is about the Gucci family. You've seen all the fucking trailers. I just feel like this was a mess. It's one of those movies that at the end of it made me wondering, why? Like, art is supposed to either like inspire or provoke thought or represent or do something, and I was sitting there in the theater for like 3 fucking hours being like, what is this trying to do? What's it doing? Why was it made? Anyone have any answers to me? And then, like, while some of the acting performances were kind of good, they felt completely incongruent with each other, not in a way that felt intentional. It was campy at times, which was fun, but again, I don't think the movie was trying to be campy. So it's just kind of a mess. Didn't love it. Feel free to skip it. Next I watched Tokyo Story, which was my first Ozu film, which I gave 4 stars, and this was amazing. This is about a couple of parents who are going to stay with their children in Tokyo. And this is an incredibly, incredibly slow film. The camera, for the most part, stays in one place for the scenes. It's kind of like located on the floor, and as we see scenes happen. I believe I read somewhere that like the camera moves once in this movie, and I think I might have missed it. I was like looking away for a second, which I feel stupid about.
What I meant to say is that there's only one time that the camera has movement. It's not that the camera is literally in the same place the entire movie and it only changes once, but like in most scenes, it's in one place, and there's only one scene when the camera moves within the scene. Okay.
This movie really just like allows the intricacies and poetry of the human experience to shine for themselves. I feel like its slowness is so deliberate, and the way that the script moves and that scenes move and that you just watch this family and all these relations come together. It's just like a very, very beautiful piece of cinema. It's something I could see myself liking even more in a second viewing, but for my first Ozu, I felt like this was a wonderful experience. Speaking of wonderful experience, next I watched Collateral, directed by Michael Mann. 4.5 stars, baby. Okay, so this is about a cab driver played by Jamie Foxx who, Tom Cruise gets into his car and is like, hey, I'll pay you a lot of money to drive around for the night, and he's eventually like, okay. Then it turns out Tom Cruise is an assassin, and this movie is both a very exciting action flick and a brilliant piece of theory on labor and work, and what it means to be a laborer in the world. Yeah, there's just so much this movie is doing in terms of like labor, fate, and purpose. I almost can't believe it. I've seen some people say this movie doesn't look good, but like, fuck off. I think if it looks scuzzy or fuzzy or weird at times, it's all completely intentional to give the perfect encapsulation of LA, and I just thought this was awesome. Then I rewatched Out of the Past, directed by Jacques Tourneur. I gave this 4.5 stars. This is my favorite noir of all time. I forgot to take notes on this movie, but I think I can describe it. This is about a man who right now runs a gas station, but a man from his past comes back to town and he's like, yo, we got unfinished business. And then a large portion of this film is that man who owns a gas station, Jeff Bailey, talking to his current girlfriend and like talking about the events of the past. And then he, like the second half of the film, he's gotta actually confront these people and deal with it. It just has everything. Fucking, what's that guy's name? Stefan from SNL. This film has everything. You have charismatic and cunning leading man. You have the best femme fatale of all time. You just have this cast of characters who are all like double timing each other in just like excellent ways. There's not one specific thing I think this movie does better than all the others. I just think it does every single thing in the noir genre so perfectly all together. And if you're looking for a noir to check out, this would be the one I will recommend time and time again. Then I watched Dogtooth, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, which is a weird film. This is about 3 teenagers, I think, who like live in this house, and their parents have basically like complete lock over them, and they're like, you won't be ready to leave the house until your dog tooth comes out. I think what works so well about this movie is that it is so unsettling, and it is even more unsettling when you realize that some of the unsettling things aren't so different from our reality. So like, one of the things they do is that like they teach incorrect definitions of words. I think like salt, they use the word toothpaste for it, just, you know, just to create this feeling of uncanniness. But also, the way they shroud the topic of sex is the exact same way that parents in our society, you know, like don't talk about sex with kids. So I feel like it's this brilliant like melding of bits from our reality and obviously like this very, very uncanny, not alternate universe, but just like this very uncanny, we're getting this window into this very, very, very bad feeling little family. It's fucked up. It'll probably make you feel uncomfortable, and it should. And I thought it was really good. Probably not my favorite Lanthimos. I think I like The Favorite better than this, but it was still better than The Lobster, which I didn't really love. Next I watched Jackie Brown, my favorite Tarantino film. Don't at me. This I gave 4.5 stars, and I thought this was fucking awesome. This is about a woman named Jackie Brown who is a flight attendant, and she gets caught smuggling back money for her boss, and then she is asked to kind of be in collaboration with the police to work on something, but also her boss is trying to, you know, like double time the police, and she figures out a way in which she can probably make this whole situation advantageous for her and her alone. I've seen people say that if this is your favorite Tarantino movie, you don't actually like Tarantino, which is interesting, because A, I do like other Tarantino, but B, this almost at times felt more like a Coen Brothers flick than a Tarantino one, and I say that as a compliment. I feel like this was such a fun character study, as well as being obviously like a fun crime thriller film. The vibes are completely immaculate the whole way through, and it's another one of those movies where like there's not one specific thing I loved about it, I just think it did everything so well. Also, Robert De Niro plays a side character in this that is so completely different from everything I've ever seen him play, and he is delightful in this. Like maybe one of my favorite parts of the movie. This was just like really great and completely unexpected from Tarantino. Then for the sake of continuity, I watched Spencer again, but I'm not going to talk about it again. I liked it. It was good. Good movie to watch the day before Christmas. Then I watched Last Night in Soho, directed by Edgar Wright. I give this 1 star, and it was my least favorite movie I saw the entire year, yay! But I started my notes with just the phrase, stupid movie. So this is about a woman who lives in England, I think, and goes to London for fashion school, and she ends up moving into this apartment, and then at night she starts having either like visions or going into the past. She's obsessed with the 60s, and she ends up kind of like in this parallel universe in the 60s, kind of inhabiting the body of this young woman who is living in the 60s. So many people I know hated this movie, and then I started watching it, and the first hour was okay. I was kind of like, okay, this isn't the best thing I've ever seen, but like, I don't get what's so bad about it. And then it continued, and it just goes off the rails. The last hour of this movie is the worst hour of a movie I've ever seen. It just like loses completely the plot. It loses everything. This movie is just like a completely, it's a failure of like what men think women, the reasons why men think women are afraid of women. It gets it all wrong. I don't always mind when mental illness is called into question, when it actually services the plot, but I feel like this uses the main character's mental illness as just like a cheap plot device. You're like left questioning like, was she imagining it all? Or was this really happening? And like, oh, her mom killed herself, maybe this woman has schizophrenia. Like, it's just like, I feel like it's completely cheap. This whole movie is fucking cheap. It looks ugly, it's weird, it's bad, it's abysmal, don't waste your time. I know my camera wants to die, but I have 4 more movies to talk about, so let's get through them. Sorry if I'm talking at the speed of light. Next, I watched Power of the Dog, directed by Jane Campion. I gave this 3.5 stars, and it was pretty good. So this was about a rancher who's kind of like revered and feared and respected in his town, and then his brother who ends up bringing home this wife and the wife's son. And there's a lot of stuff that happens, but I feel like it kind of like adds little bits and pieces throughout the movie, so I don't really want to talk about everything it's about right from the synopsis, because I feel like it is pretty rewarding getting to see where this film goes. So I think this movie does some things very good. I think the way it meditates on loneliness and on power and masculinity are very good, but it's also trying to do a lot of stuff. I think some of the other themes it tries to tackle, it doesn't do very well, so I feel like sometimes it overplayed its hand and other times it was actually nice and restrained. Cumberbatch has an unexpectedly amazing performance in this. I grew up watching him on Sherlock, and I think I've always associated him in my mind with that, which like I'm not a fan of anymore, so I was really excited to watch him, you know, be really good in this. But the ending I think just raises questions that I don't love. I'm not sure I love how this stuck the landing either. Worth a watch, definitely a pretty good movie, but just one I have a few issues with. So on the same day as that, I watched Old Henry, directed by Patsy Ponsaroli. Yep. Gave this 2.5 stars, and this was the worst Western of the day. This is about a farmer and his son who end up taking in this injured man who's got this like satchel full of cash. And then the police are looking for that man, and they kind of have to figure out like who's telling me the truth, whose side am I on, or whatever. Lots of movies with bad endings this year, because I'm not sure The Power of the Dog is bad, I just have problems with it. But this movie has one tone for 90% of the movie, and then a completely different tone for the last 10% of the movie. And I don't think it works. I think it goes from something kind of serious and slow and meditative to something very jokey and hammy and like really earnestly stupid. It was never great, but I think it went from fine to kind of weird and bad. So another one that I think that like if you're trying to catch up on 2021 movies, I give you permission to skip this one. The good news is I ended the year with 2 amazing movies. So first I rewatched Eyes Wide Shut, directed by Stanley Kubrick. I gave this 4.5 stars, and this remains my second favorite Kubrick after The Shining, which is just one of my favorite movies of all time. Eyes Wide Shut is about this rich couple, and it's about sex, but it's about everything other than sex. I feel like Eyes Wide Shut is the only movie that understands that sex is about everything other than sex. It's about every like psychological and societal and like philosophical thing that goes into that pursuit of sex. This movie has like power and corruption and sexuality masked in opulence and not beauty, but yeah, no, and kind of like in grandness, when really like terrible, disgusting things are happening up, down, left, and right, and yet this movie looks and even at times feels grand and beautiful. There's a lot of nudity in this movie, but my favorite thing that I noticed this time around is that Tom Cruise's character, who's like the man of the couple, is Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, which is funny. I bet this movie ruined their marriage. There's gotta be stuff written about this. Whatever, okay. So Tom Cruise is like always in pursuit of sex this entire movie, and there's so many naked women, but the one time he reaches out and you see him touch a pair of tits, you don't see him. Very interesting to me. I just think this is like the best movie regarding sex. So good, feels terrible, amazing movie. Speaking of feels terrible, amazing movie, finishing out the month, I saw Licorice Pizza, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, in theaters. I gave this 4.5 stars, and like it legitimately took me just about like 12-15 hours to recover from seeing it. This is about a kid who feels like an adult and an adult who basically feels like a kid, as it follows their friendship relationship in the 70s. And this, I mean, like, I had like a very, very personal reaction to this movie for many reasons, but I also think this movie did many things right to get me to have that reaction. I think you really understand the reprieve these two characters feel with each other, because the realities of the adult world, which we're constantly reminded of in news and in newspapers, it's horrifying. And so these two people retreat to childhood, one of whom is still in childhood, to feel that's something at least you understand, that feels comfortable. It's way less scary. Something I saw this movie criticized for is that like, oh, it just felt like an unconnected series of events. Like, what was the point of half of the scenes? And like, that's what childhood was. There wasn't a linearity to your narrative yet, and so like this movie feels like how childhood felt. Alana Haim is like immaculate in this movie, and I think both her performance and the script really highlight what it feels like to be a woman in the world and to have so many male eyes on you, and how that can simultaneously feel so enthralling and exciting and like absolutely horrifying, that both of those things can exist at once. And I feel like it just like both Alana Haim and Cooper Hoffman do an amazing job, but like I especially feel like Alana's character is handled like brilliantly. This is easily my favorite movie that came out in 2021, and I'm so glad I got to see it in theaters and had an entire hour-long drive back home, which I feel like I needed to fully process. But like, amazing movie. If you get a chance to see it in theaters, I really, really cannot recommend it enough. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sure this video was very, very long. I've got some like end of the year content coming out in the next few weeks, like my favorite albums of the year, my favorite movies I watched this year, and ranking all of the books I read this year. So stay tuned for all those. Like and subscribe, as the YouTube girlies say. That is all I have for you today, and you will see me in the next one.